Meals, Chapter 8, Building Flavor and Balanced Baking. So we've laid down a foundation about nutrition, and we'll reflect back to that throughout the remainder of the semester. But part 2 of your book, which is what we're starting today, and the class begins with a chapter dedicated to the foundations of balanced cooking. That includes descriptions of how to use ingredients, preparation methods, techniques, cooking methods to create balanced, delicious dishes, and also all about flavor. Survey after survey, year after year, shows that flavor is really the biggest factor influencing food choice. So it really doesn't matter how healthy a food is. What matters to consumers is how good it is, how flavorful it tastes. Consumers aren't willing to, nor should they have to, sacrifice flavor for nutrition. Healthful foods can taste good too. And this is such an important thing that I want you to take away as you go through this semester. You know, dietitians and chefs at one time, it was almost a headbutting because, you know, chefs would bring on their butter and dietitians would talk about the importance of, you know, reducing butter for reduction of saturated fat. But we realize that health and flavor can coexist. And it's important in your everyday cooking to just begin to think about what you can do to build flavor to eliminate a lot of the sugar, fat, and salt. A long-standing criticism of healthy food is that when you take out the fat, the salt, and the sugar, it results in foods that are bland and boring, lacking in flavor and texture. Many times that criticism is justified. You know, back in the day when we had a healthy diet plate at a restaurant, it would be a meat patty and a cup of cottage cheese. But now we know a lot more about how to build flavor. But it's true that the omission of key flavor enhancing ingredients does make creating wonderful flavor and texture more challenging. But a goal of this class is to help the culinary professional meet the challenge of providing food that is both healthful and delicious. So our objectives for today are using ingredients appropriately to develop flavor. That's really the key component here. The unfortunate thing is that we're not in a lab, so we have to talk about it instead of actually create it. We're going to explain how to use a variety of preparation techniques to add flavor, and to describe how to use different cooking methods to also bring flavor, like sautéing and dry sautéing, stir frying, etc. We're going to explain how to plan flavorful and nutritious menu items, and a little bit about healthier baked goods, including ingredient substitutions. As a culinary professional, we have a responsibility to our clients to use contemporary cooking techniques that are balanced, moderate in rich ingredients, and will be prepared to possess nutrition stability. Balanced cooking will encompass an understanding of ingredients that will help develop flavor. So you can no longer rely on more than moderate use of salt, sugar, and fat for flavor. Over half of Americans are watching what they eat, paying more attention to what they prepare at home and what they're eating in restaurants. And the typical American buys snacks and meals from restaurants several times a week. And that's really any food service operation. Think about what 7-Eleven is providing and some of the other, gas stations. People are buying food at all different kinds of establishments. And they depend on chefs and cooks and food service employees to help provide nutritious options. And that's really the main thing. You know, studies show that even though restaurants are really, going out there and really trying to offer better options, that many times people still have the mindset that they're going to splurge when they eat out. But I think it's still a responsibility to provide options, because when people realize that a healthier option can taste good, they're more likely to continue to purchase those kinds of items. So I would say even fast food, a lot of different places are now promoting balanced options, and that's really the main thing, is to provide a choice. There's always going to be some choices that are very, high calorie, high fat, but as long as we provide, some choices for people. So first we're going to talk a little bit about flavoring. The best way to go about building flavor is to build a flavor profile. A flavor profile is the harmony of flavors and aromas that make up a total taste of the dish. The primary flavor of most dishes comes from the main ingredients, and the supporting flavors enhance the main ingredients. So this chapter will look at building flavor using different ingredients, preparation techniques, and also cooking methods. It's really important to have a solid foundation in food first to develop balanced menus and recipes. But think about it, anyone can follow a recipe. The culinary professional should have an understanding of many different seasonings and flavorings and how to use various ingredients to enhance the flavor of food. So as your skills develop, building a flavor profile will become more natural and automatic, just like cooking fundamentals you learned in the beginning of your career. You have to shrug off inhibitions and pay more attention to flavors rather than just instructions. And you have to experiment by tweaking a tried and true recipe with new ingredients and observe what happens when flavors interact. You can change one ingredient for another and change up your recipe, like for instance, replacing rosemary with thyme, or maybe olive oil with maybe something like hazelnut oil. So there's a lot of things you can do to build flavor. Now there's two things to think about. One is seasoning and one is flavoring. Seasonings are substances used to bring out a flavor that's already present. And a flavoring is actually a substance used to add a new flavor or to modify the original. So these are the things that we're going to be talking about today. With practice, you'll be learning to trust your sense more than recipes in a book. For help and inspiration, I highly recommend a few books, and I've listed these in your module. The Flavor Bible and Culinary Artistry are two books that are really great by Karen Page and Andrew Dornenberg. And then there's the Vegetarian Flavor Bible from Karen Page, which is also very good, and it really focuses on flavoring and seasoning for vegetarian diets. And then the other one that I really like is The Art of Flavor by Daniel Patterson and Mandy Aftel. This information once only existed in chefs' heads. Now it's in book form. So it's really good it's a good read to kind of get some, ideas and to help expand your horizons on flavor. And if you're just getting started, even the McCormick's website, www.mccormick.com, provides a really good resource about flavor trends, and if I were you, I'd check it out. Another concept that is important for you to know about is molecular gastronomy, also called modern cuisine, experimental cuisine, or culinary physics. And it uses food science to create innovative food flavors, textures, aromas, mouthfeel, and presentation. Specific techniques are beyond the scope of this class and involve specialized equipment, ingredients, and skills, but there's a lot of excellent videos available to understand the concept. There's a chef in Chicago, Chef Grant Achatz, at the renowned Alinea restaurant, and that's in Chicago. He presented a lecture called Reinventing Texture and Flavor at the Harvard University School of Engineering and Applied Science in 2010. So if you go to YouTube, you can actually Google that, Reinventing Texture and Flavor, Chef Grant, and I'm going to spell the last name Achatz. It's really interesting and quite exciting, actually. There's a few chefs around the country and even around the world that are just so super creative that it's almost mind-blowing. Okay, to start off this discussion for today, we're going to talk about all the different ingredients and methods to help build flavor. The first one is going to be herbs and spices. Herbs and spices really create a wonderful opportunity for chefs and even home cooks to express their creativity. They add flavor without calories, and many also provide antioxidants and phytochemicals. So they're nature's bounty. They're nature's treasures that also provide so much in the way of enhancing our food. Most herbs, which are leaves of aromatic plants, are available fresh, dried, and in some cases even frozen. Some herbs dry more successfully than others. Aroma is really a good indicator of quality in both fresh and dried herbs. Some herbs, such as basil, mint, and dill, are so delicate. Others, such as rosemary and thyme, are much more assertive as a flavor. Herbs can be purchased as pastes or made into pestos. Herbs are generally added toward the end of cooking because their flavor and aroma are so much more delicate. Many chefs even have kitchen gardens that provide herbs for cooking, and many restaurants now even have potted gardens inside the restaurants. So the use of herbs is just a no-brainer. It just adds so much in the way of flavor and, sometimes texture and also visual appeal. Spices, on the other hand, are aromatics prepared from the roots, buds, flowers, fruits, bark, or seeds of plants. For instance, cinnamon comes from a bark, and pepper from a berry. Ginger comes from a root, and nutmeg from a fruit. Most spice flavors are intense and powerful. And spices generally, 9 times out of 10, are usually dried and available either whole or ground. Whole spices obviously are going to retain their flavor longer than ground spices. So if you're looking to, add a better pop of flavor, it's better to get the whole spice and grate it, as opposed to the ground form, which are going to deteriorate in flavor so much easier. Some spices and seeds used for seasoning can also be toasted to make them more aromatic. So many times we can take, fennel seed, mustard seed, and saute them in dry saute them in a skillet. Wait till they cool off and then grind them, and they're going to give such a more intense flavor. A few spices, such as cayenne pepper, intensify in flavor during cooking. So these are things to really remember when you are dealing with different spices in recipes. And also another key thing to remember is that when you're changing the yield of a recipe, the amount of spices and herbs should, be adjusted by taste. Sometimes when you're increasing a recipe 10 to 50 servings, you're not going to need 5 times the amount of the herb or spice. So that's something we all tend to learn from, doing it the wrong way. But it's good to remember that when you're cooking, that you can always add more in the way of spices, but you can't take away. So think about that when you're doing your quantity food prep. Okay, what about cooking with herbs? Fresh herbs can only withstand about 30 minutes of fresh cooking, so they work best as a finishing touch. So you can toss them in before serving or, in other accompaniments such as a fresh salsa. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't add them in cooking. Like, for instance, if I make a big pot of chili, I'm going to throw in a big handful of chopped cilantro, and it adds to the flavor of the dish. But if you're really wanting a good, nice pop of flavor and maybe even add some color, it's good to end it it's better to add it at the end of the cooking process. Dried herbs work well in longer cooking, such as stocks and stews, braising, marinating. They're great when you're using them for rub and also sauces. And because dried herbs are so much more potent than fresh, you have to realize that if you're substituting, you have to do the equivalent. And an herb equivalent is that 1 tablespoon of finely cut fresh herbs is equivalent to a teaspoon of crumbled dried herb, and that's equivalent to a fourth or a half a teaspoon of ground dried herbs. So, in other words, the equivalent is 3 to 1. If you're using fresh, you're using 3 times the amount. So 1 teaspoon of dried equals 1 tablespoon of fresh. And if it's a ground up dried, it's so much more potent, you need much less of it. So again, when you're using, herbs in cooking and trying to substitute spices, it's very important to get the right substitution or the right equivalent. On page 226 and 227 of your textbook, there's a really good guide of using herbs. And it's really important to learn to identify the many different herbs and spices, and that requires a really keen sense of taste and smell. Visual identity is simply not enough, and the only way to learn it is to experiment. Experimentation, when you prepare food, is really the most efficient way to gain experience. First, start with what you like or what you love. Start with what you know, and then move on from there. Countries, regions, cities, and even neighborhoods have traditional spice and herb combinations that are used as seasonings. So you can see on the slide, when we refer to a Mediterranean flavor or an Italian dish, you automatically know what herbs go into that seasoning, such as basil, possibly oregano, maybe some, olives and thyme. If you're referring to a dish that's from South America or Central America, you know that it probably has cilantro and maybe some red onion, maybe some sort of chili, lime juice, lime zest. If we're going for more Western Europe or a French flair, tarragon is really traditional with maybe capers, Dijon mustard, maybe some shallots instead of onions. And then if we're thinking about Indian cooking, that's when you bring in more of those warmer herbs like coriander and ginger and possibly raisins, cloves, garam masala, some chilies, garlic. And then, of course, if we're cooking Asian, cilantro or Thai basil instead of the Genovese basil. We have our ginger, garlic, scallion is an onion or an aromatic. We have orange, we have rice wine, fish sauce, soy sauce, sesame oil, peanut oil. So there's a lot of things you already know. So if you're just a beginner and learning about herbs and spices and flavorings, reflect back on some of these countries and regions that really provide, wonderful herb combinations that you already know and love. So, refer to that, and there's just a lot of good information out there on the web. But I think, again, like I mentioned before, experimentation is really the key to learning this. I once visited Chicago's renowned spice house, and I want to give you their website because it's such a great resource, www.thespicehouse.com. They actually grind and blend their own spices by hand in really small batches on the premises. The owners, Tom and Patty Erd, and Patty's parents before them have spent 5 decades finding the best sources and countries of origin for each spice. This is such an excellent source for herbs and spices that you're not typically going to find throughout food distributors. So keep that in your back pocket. In the Dallas area, try Penzeys Spices for a wonderful flavor journey. It's kind of a fun field trip. And the website is www.penzeys.com. And there's a store just in the North Dallas area. So again, there's really a lot of resources for this, but just playing around in the kitchen is really most fun. Herbs and spices have been used for decades for not only culinary, but also medicinal purposes for centuries. The benefits of certain herbs and spices are described on pages 226 and 229 of your textbook. When we talk about phytochemicals, we refer to those in Chapter 3. And there's a lot of different ones that you don't have to commit to memory. But herbs and spices contain phytochemicals, which are compounds produced by plants that not only promote health, but also fight off free radicals that may prevent cancer and also cardiovascular disease. They may be very helpful for people that have heart problems, nervous system, and help with diabetes. So there's a lot of benefit, not only just a flavor component. When we talk about phytochemicals, there's a lot of different ones. There's carotenoids, which are fat-soluble phytochemicals with a vitamin A-like structure. And they're the pigments responsible for the colors in many of the red, green, yellow, and orange fruits and vegetables. They have a super strong antioxidant component and also protective properties. There's over 600 of them. The ones that we recognize are beta-carotene, lutein, zeaxanthin, lycopene. And again, these are all discussed in your book. If you want more information on them, please ask me for some additional resources. Flavonoids are among the most potent and abundant antioxidants in the diet. There's more than 4,000 flavonoids that have been identified, some that have been associated with reduction of risk of cardiovascular disease. Cruciferous vegetables differ from other classes of vegetables in that they're rich sources of sulfur-containing compounds called glucosinolates. So that's another phytochemical. There's also phytoestrogens, which are plant-derived compounds that are similar in effect to the hormone estrogen. And then there's a lot of other phytochemicals like egalic acid, capsaicin, which is the enzyme found in chili peppers. There's curcumin, resveratrol in the wine and alcohol products. So there's a lot of different phytochemicals, but that's like the big bonus that you get from utilizing herbs and spices. The next few slides discuss what are the herbs and how they're used. The first one is basil, and if you go to even just the local flower shop or nursery, you're going to learn a little bit about the different types. You'll see them at the markets. Genovese basil is probably one of the more common, but if you're cooking with Thai, there's Thai basil. There's a lot of different types of each herb. They're very sweet, slightly peppery, wonderful pop of flavor, and they're really wonderful used in like Italian and Mediterranean cooking. So the use of basil with tomatoes, eggplant, to make pesto, complex and green salads, a lot of different sauces. Basil is a wonderful, wonderful herb. And then we have oregano, which belongs to the same herb family as basil, but it's a lot more pungent and pepper-like. It's also used in Italian and Mediterranean cooking. And then there's a specific Mexican oregano that's used in Mexican cuisine. So a lot of different uses for oregano. Because it is more pungent and pepper-like, like any herb or spice, it's best not to add a lot of it. You can always add more. I had an experiment once with a stock pot of tomato sauce, and it added a little bit too much oregano, and it can ruin really a whole big pot of sauce because it is so pungent. Tarragon, on the other hand, has more of a delicate sweet flavor with a little hint of licorice, and it's really great added to various sauces, to infuse in vinegars. It's delicious with poultry. I even like it when I make a chicken salad with a light mayonnaise dressing. Add a little bit of tarragon, just picks up the flavor a notch. Rosemary is so much more of a strong flavor. It's actually, you can buy it as a bush or a potted plant for your kitchen. Adds a wonderful aroma in the kitchen. It's really a leaf of an evergreen shrub, and it's often used in dishes where liquid is involved, like soups or stocks or soups. I love it when I roast vegetables or meat, like lamb or pork or chicken or even red meat. But dried rosemary is wonderful, or even fresh rosemary for that matter, is wonderful dried, and you can use it in cooking, like roasting whole new potatoes. It just adds such a wonderful flavor. I usually chop it up to, enhance the flavor a little bit more, to release the flavor oils a little bit more. When you use dried, you almost have to crumble it between your hands to release some of the flavors. And if you are using it in liquid, it's best to strain it, because if it's dried, sometimes those little leaves actually get very dry and they can, be damaging to your esophagus. Dill is another very delicate classic flavor. I think everybody recognizes the dill pickles. That's really kind of a classic. It's also used in various salads. Goes really well in like a sour cream type dip. It's very good with fish and also vegetables. It has a real delicate flavor with almost a floury kind of sensation. So dill has a lot of different uses and goes very well with a lot of different things, primarily fish and also your vegetables. Mint is wonderful and refreshing. It's a very sweet herb. It's cool. It's used in a lot of cocktails like mojitos, where you muddle the mint. Mint is also refreshing with an iced tea. It goes really well with complex dishes like lamb. It's available in a lot of different varieties. There's black mint, English mint, spearmint, peppermint. There's a lot of different types of mint that you can purchase at the nursery, or usually in the grocery store. If you're seeking, or if you're purchasing through a distributor, you're generally going to get like a spearmint type product. Fresh mint is really good for flavoring a lot of different things, and it's really wonderful to grow it because it's very prolific. Mint many times can take over your whole herb garden if you don't separate it, or maybe even doing it in a separate pot. I have a wonderful herb garden at my home, and it's pretty good in terms of maintaining over the winter. We don't have that strong of a winter to really die off the herb garden, and it comes back every year except for a few of the herbs, such as basil. Sometimes I have to replace my basil. But having an herb garden is really kind of fun, and it enables you to use those herbs a little bit more frequently. Now, if you have to purchase them from a store or distributor, it's really important to kind of understand a little bit about how to store them. I would say refrigerating cut fresh herbs are very important to prevent spoilage. Fresh herbs will keep only up to about 4 days in the refrigerator. You'll be lucky to get longer than that. But you can put like fresh herb bouquets in containers with their stems down, just like you would cut flowers, and place them in the refrigerator. And then you need to change that water every day. Or you can loosely wrap the herb bouquets in film wrap or like perforated plastic bags to extend their shelf life. Smaller sprigs and individual leaves should be wrapped in a paper towel, a damp paper towel, and placed in a food-safe plastic bag. So what I always do is I wash them only before I need to use them. I don't wash them before I store them, because that way they decompose a little bit quicker. But you can also, to keep them longer, you can wash your herbs and slice them into fine strips like a chiffonade. And you can fill an ice cube tray halfway with water. And you put about a teaspoon or so of those fresh herbs that you've just chopped up in each square of the tray. And you want to make sure that the leaves are actually down in the water. And then you place the half-filled tray in the freezer, and when the ice cubes are almost frozen, you finish filling the tray with water. And then you place the tray back in your freezer to freeze everything very solid. And once the ice cubes are formed, you can remove them from the tray and store them in Ziploc container bags. And then that way you can always have the herbs available, and you can use a cube as needed to flavor your stocks or soups or sauces or something, however you're using them. So it's important to understand a little bit about storing them so that you can extend the shelf life of those fresh herbs. Now, what about aromatic spices? There's so many different ones, and you can see in the picture that there's some of the more common. Some of them are whole, like for instance, on the bottom row, the cardamom. And then, of course, you have your saffron, your star anise, and most of these can be obtained either whole or, in ground form. And you can use these sweet ones in baking or making desserts, or such as if you're making a Moroccan dish where you want to have a little bit of sweet and savory. These are the spices to turn to because they lend themselves to more of a sweet sensation in your mouth. And they also smell very sweet and savory. These are the spices that you would use if you're attempting to reduce the sugar content of a recipe because they add that sensation of sweet. Now, what if I want to, increase the flavor profile of a spice? You can take a whole spice and you can toast it in like a small 6-inch skillet, and you want to do it dry. You want to do a dry saute. And you can do mustard seeds and peppercorns, fennel seed, star anise, coriander, cloves, cardamom, caraway, cumin seed, juniper berries, allspice. And what you're doing is just, adding a little toasty flavor, which gives it just so much, it just adds so much more to your dish. So how do you do it? I generally put a saute pan on medium to high heat for about a minute, and then I add my whole spice, and I keep tossing so that I don't burn it until I start, smelling that nutty aroma. And then I, take it off the stove and cool it, and then you can grind it. If you don't cool it first, you're going to generate steam, which is going to, ruin your spice actually, because, it's adding moisture to the powder. And then you always want to store in airtight containers. Sometimes people toast and grind just what they need, and that way you can always have it fresh and have the best fresh flavor. Let's talk about some of the more common spices. Probably one of the most common that we use every day is pepper and red pepper. So pepper comes in 3 forms: black, white, and green. Black pepper is really mostly used in dark colored food, and white pepper would be used for making white sauces like a bechamel sauce if you're wanting to add that flavor component and you don't want the black flecks in your white sauce. Red pepper is also called cayenne. It's not really necessarily related to your white or black pepper. It comes from the dried red pepper pod, and it has a much more spicy, hot profile. So pepper is very common. It's something that adds a lot of flavor, and I think most people are well aware of how to use that. Paprika comes in 2 flavors, mild and hot. A lot of people aren't even aware of that. Hungarian paprika, hot and spicy, and it's used to make Hungarian goulash. And then there's Spanish paprika, which is mild in flavor and more vibrant red, and it can be used as a garnish or add to sauces, soups, vegetables. And when you have any kind of excessive heat, it can turn brown. But using different kinds of paprika can really add a lot of flavor. My personal favorite is smoked paprika, which just generates such tremendous flavor. It can be a little overpowering, so it's best to, again, like anything, start small, and then you can always add more. So what about herb and spice blends? There's a lot of different blends that we can use that are actually a combination of all different kind of spices. For instance, curry powder was really developed by the British to imitate the fiery cooking of southern India. Often includes things like red pepper, turmeric, coriander, cumin, ground ginger, fenugreek. Depending on the brand, the flavor and the hotness can vary tremendously. It actually originated in India, and again, depending on where you purchase it and if it's and how it's blended, it's really going to be so different in different brands. And if you go to some place like the Spice House, they're going to specialize in curry from different regions of India, which are going to be, just amazing for some of your dishes from that region. When I think about curry powder, it reminds me of a 2014 movie that is my all-time favorite. I can watch it all the time. It's called The 100-Foot Journey. It's a must-watch for any culinary professional. It's about a young, self-taught culinary novice and his family. They get displaced from their native India, and they move to a quaint French village and decide to open up an eatery literally 100 feet from a Michelin star restaurant. The owners get into a big war, civil war, and they actually, go at it, and the French restaurant tries to put the Indian restaurant out of business. And then the owner of the French restaurant recognizes the impressive Epicurean talents of the young man, the Indian man, and takes him under her wing. I highly recommend it. It's really emotional, and the way they treat the curry powder in this movie is just amazing. So there's a lot of herb and spice blends. Curry powder being just one of them. There's so many. How do we store our spices? It's important to store them in a cool, dry place in airtight containers, and it's best not to keep containers anywhere near a hot stove where you get that steam and high heat. Dried herbs and spices provide flavor because they contain oils that break down faster if they're exposed to air, light, and warm temperatures. So that's why it's very important to store them in a cool, dry place. Dried herbs and spices will retain their flavor for only about 6 months. So when you get them, you want to record the date on the container and then maybe just discard them as they lose aroma and fade in color. Now, they're never going to really go bad, but they lose their potency and lose their, potential flavoring power. And you also want to always avoid dried herbs in powdered form, because they lose their flavor in a matter of weeks. So it's better to get your own and grind it. Okay, we talked about the spice blends. There's a lot of global ones, again, that we think about, that we combine to have such distinct flavors. So if we are looking for a blend, you can get a shaker like a McCormick blend or any other Spice Islands. There's so many different companies that produce spices. Italian would be more of a garlic, onion, basil, oregano, crushed red pepper, thyme. Just like we mentioned in the other slide, it's very obvious what the flavors are when you think about Italian or Asian. So if you're just starting out and you're wanting to create recipes, just think of the ingredients that go into that particular global flavor. There's a lot of pre-made herb and spice blends that you can purchase in the store. Some of the more traditional blends are like a Cajun spice, which would be a blend of paprika, black pepper, cumin, mustard seed, cayenne pepper, thyme, oregano, garlic, onion, salt. Cajun is really great with chicken, fish, shrimp, gumbo. And then we have our Asian 5-spice powder. It's actually sometimes called 5 fragrance powder or 5 perfumers or 5 heavenly spices. And it's a blend of more of your sweeter aromatics like star anise, fennel seeds, Szechuan or white pepper, cinnamon, cloves. It's used in southern China and Vietnam in stir-fried dishes, and in marinades for some of your meat. It's a wonderful addition to barbecue ribs and braised leeks. So, these are things that you can actually buy already mixed up. Fine herb is a time-honored French seasoning that's composed of fresh minced parsley, tarragon, chervil, and chives. It's often used in omelets or grilled on meats or used in marinades. And then there's garam masala, which is more of an Indian seasoning. It's a warm spice mix that usually includes things like cinnamon and cardamom, along with pepper, cumin, clove, and nutmeg. It's used a lot with lamb, chicken, fish, potatoes, some rice pilaf dishes. So just by incorporating some of these spice blends really give you such an amazing toolbox of how you can flavor food. Harissa is a spicy chili paste that's used in North Africa and Middle Eastern cooking. It's also available in powder form. And the ingredients include smoked hot chili peppers, garlic, cumin, coriander, caraway, mint, olive oil, tomatoes. I mean, you could even use that in your scrambled eggs in the morning.